Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we have Angela Doss, internationally board certified lactation consultant and new parent educator, joining us for the second time to talk about new parents and what that's like in regard to sex and intimacy after having a baby.
Welcome, Angela. We're glad to have you back.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be back.
So let's dig into it. So last time we chatted with you, you shared quite a bit about yourself, how you got here, and we talked about things like maternal gatekeeping and breastfeeding. Let's dive into intimacy. Why do you think this is an important topic for new parents to consider?
Yeah, I mean, everything we left our conversation last time talking about maternal gatekeeping and kind of the resentment that comes along being the primary parent. And I think that resentment rolls right on into our sex lives, right? It is now you're constantly needed. And then this form of intimacy that used to be something you and your partner connected with and that felt good to you is now another task. And so how do we navigate that? What do love languages look like after having a baby? Because they're wildly different than they were when it was just the two of you, or even just a three of you if you had a younger child and now you're adding.
Truth. And I don't know if people know, but I specialize in postpartum mental health care as my therapy practice. And this can have your mental health postpartum can have a massive impact on your drive for sex and intimacy anyway, but especially postpartum. But also think about it. If you're carrying a baby, your insides get rearranged. So now sex automatically is going to feel different anyway.
Yeah.
It can feel more painful. It, like you said, is another task because we're tired. It's a complicated space to be in when maybe it wasn't so complicated before.
Yeah. There's all the layers. There's hormones, especially if you're breastfeeding and you're touching somebody all the time. There's so much body contact, and another person wants to come in hot and touch you, and you're like, hold up. I need a minute. I'm overstimulated. I can't get my brain there. And you're sleep deprived. So it's not like the sexiest time in a lot of our lives.
What are you talking about? It's amazing. You talked about resentment last episode for the like on the maternal side. And I think about once the baby comes and then all these things are happening, right? You talk about the hormones, maybe it doesn't feel as good. You have all the contact with the baby. The other partner's not getting that need met. And I think there's not a lot of education around expectation of timing of this or what this looks like. And so you get resentment from that partner of, my needs aren't being met. You've already had the baby. What's going on? Meanwhile, the doctor's like, you had a cesarean section. You got to wait 6 weeks.
Cesarean's even longer.
Yeah, it's like closer to 8. And also there's like, every body is different. So I like really push back to this magical 6 weeks. You can, you have your 6-week checkup post a vaginal birth or 8-week post a cesarean, and you're like cleared, right? Well, cleared for what? Like your 6-week-old baby, from a new parent educator standpoint, a 6-week-old baby is the bitchiest baby there is. They are fussy. You're in like a huge growth spurt, which means that they're likely not sleeping well. And so then you go to this doctor appointment, midwife, whomever you see for your care, and they're like, oh, you're Angela again. You can return to exercise. You can return to sex. You can return to all these things. And I think partners hear that timeline of expectation.
Oh, they're marking off the calendar. They're marking off the calendar. Hold on. Wait, this is 5 weeks. 1 more week or whatever that timeline is.
Right. Right. And meanwhile, you're likely still bleeding 6 weeks postpartum. Like you're still healing. You are, if you had a vaginal birth, you're literally opened up like the canal you want to have sex with, big enough to birth a baby. Like, come on. The timeline is different for everybody. And I think that opening up that conversation among partners is really important because, like they might be counting down the days, and quite opposite, the female partner might be like cringing down the days.
Truth. You think about tearing, you think about scarring, you think about if you're breastfeeding, especially lubrication in the vagina goes down.
Yeah.
There's so many different things that change that we think we can just go back to how sex was, and you can't. You can't.
Right.
Not safely and not comfortably.
Yeah. So a lot of open communication on that end. It's like going back to the basics, right? You are a new body after you birth a human. Things feel different and you respond differently. And so, and also like the things that you find sexy are different, right? It is like, you want to get naked tonight? I might need like a heads up. Maybe before I was spontaneous and into that, but now I might need like a variation of your like, hey girl flag to be flung in the house 10 hours before you're expecting this. And maybe you put the baby to bed and I get a shower alone. You know, those types of things. Our language for this kind of foreplay changes when we are deep in the trenches of having a baby. And we're not talking just like a 6 to 10 week old baby where we're just getting back into the ability to do this and our body being ready to do this. But I think this is true for any young kid family. Have young kids, especially if you're still nursing, and yes, they might be sleeping decently, but they're still like attached to you a good portion of the time. And my kids are 2, 5, and 8, and I would argue that they're still always touching me. And so just in parenthood in general, the love language changes, the foreplay, what that looks like changes.
The energy, the ability to give. Yeah.
It maybe even exacerbates some of the love languages. And what I mean by that is my wife is not physical touch. That was even more so true after having our son. And I remember one day she was very nice to let me go engage in one of my hobbies. And I came back and I wanted to hug her. And she's like, way too much touch today. It's all because she's been with my son the whole time. And it's like, oh, wow. So it can even kind of exacerbate the ones that they don't have, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Acts of service, if that was already one of them. Now you're really going to be high on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna need more service now.
And not the sexy kind.
And
not the sexy kind, like the do the laundry and put it away kind.
Mop the floor in like short jean shorts. Is that?
There's nothing sexier than my husband putting laundry away, y'all.
Literally you're not gonna love it, but I've told a client before because they were postpartum. I said, my husband, what I thought was sexy with him before, now the sexiest thing is him shampooing my carpet. And it's true. Like it goes before kids, I'd have been like, whatever. Now I'm like, yeah, especially if I didn't have to ask. Get it.
Yes. Yes.
Angela, I'm curious.
On our last episode, we talked about, Greg, you had said like, we were talking about how sometimes it happens when a partner that's not the primary care partner, not the one to do all this mental load, does the things, right? And then they replay the things back to us at the end of the day. Like, did you notice that I unloaded the dishwasher? Did you notice that I did this? And they're just seeking that validation of like, yes, I did, and thank you. Those things become like what you're saying, like they shampooed the carpet. Amazing. Like giving credit where maybe they are showing that effort, seeing that effort too is our responsibility, right? Like they pointed out to us, which a lot of us, myself included, find obnoxious, but looking at it through the lens of like, they're just seeking like, thank you. And yes, I did notice that you did this, but that comes into this conversation as well around like, you know, it's not the daily tasks always, but at the daily tasks when you're tired and you're like wanting to get frisky once the kids go to bed or have a nap time, the daily tasks are like that first burden we think about is like all the touching and then all the daily tasks. So how can we kind of navigate around that, feel sexy in this postpartum space and to find what intimacy looks like again?
And I think that validation, that need for validation increases when, especially the hormones are still trying to rebound, a lot of physical stuff is trying to rebound. And so there's not a lot of connection in general, and maybe not even being present because you literally had a human in your body, right? And so the other partner is, well, I'm not getting that feedback I need to feel important. And there's not enough knowledge about what's going on for the partner to even not personalize it. And so I think that validation sometimes is that need for it is higher in these moments. So look what I did, because maybe the partner's just sitting there and moody and upset because all the hormones are everywhere. The baby's crying, a lot of touch, right?
When you go from being your partner's sole focus to now, say it's the mom is now focused mostly on baby. And so you go from a ton of attention from your female partner to hardly any. Plus, men also have hormone shifts, which we don't talk about. Their testosterone takes a full shit on itself. And we don't
Yeah.
talk about the fluctuation for men too. It's insane how much happens in the postpartum period.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like what you said, they go from being like right next to you, co-pilot through life, like you in the back of the bus, friend. Like, move on back.
Angela, I'm curious. So I've dealt with this with some of my couples, and the partner, the non, birthing partner, they have unrealistic expectations of like rebounding physically, for the female partner, and that affects their attraction and intimacy. So maybe the partner who, carried the baby is wanting it, but the other partner's not, because they haven't gotten back to where they were before baby, and this unrealistic expectation I see. And have you come across that? Like, how do you approach that with couples?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unrealistic expectations that then just lead to like a letdown, right? Like not like a breastfeeding letdown, but like just like a oof, that sucked. Like this isn't going how I expected it to go. And I think a lot of it goes back to educating. And one of the things I'm seeing a trend of that I just love is more involved partners, more involved dads and non-birthing parents that are showing up to the not just breastfeeding classes, but the childbirth classes. And they're really in that space. And I think when you see your partner go through childbirth, no matter what that looks like for them, whether it's a physiological, like air quote, natural labor without pain medication, a home birth, whatever, or a cesarean, like, or any variation in between, it gives you this respect of like, holy shit, this is a feat to go through that. And I think it gives us a different lens to look at our partner and not expect that bounce back, right? Because you got to witness that. So I think that more parents being involved, even if they're not having the baby, but they're involved in all of the things, help them on that postpartum side understand just how much change has happened and how slow this might really go.
How do you talk to, or what tools do you use for when those partners do have unrealistic expectations? How, if they haven't been attending the classes, if they aren't quite grasping how big of a feat this has been for them, how do you educate them about that? How do you talk about it?
Yeah, a lot of times, it comes up maybe with the mom. I'm a lactation consultant, so often I am like in the like sacred postpartum space with mom and baby, and I absolutely love when we fold dad, but these conversations usually happen in the intimacy between two women, right? Having these conversations. I'm also a mom that has navigated things, and so I really educate on the like communication aspect of this. Like we can't expect our partners to read our minds. And we are kind of that grumpy, hormonally fueled, like sleep deprived mama bear in this season. And that doesn't translate well to a very also sleep deprived, hormonally shifted, tender to do their best, but also like maybe like in my household, my husband thinks postpartum, he thinks pregnancy and postpartum is like the sexiest thing. He just thinks pregnant women are beautiful. And then we have these open conversations about how challenging it is for him to be wildly attracted to me. And I'm like, hold up. And so shifting things to like understand that maybe touch isn't the thing right now, but you can tell your partner how banging you think she's looking right now. Like, and it might not be as received as you hope, but maybe we just shift some things and start floating the idea out there that you can be sexy and it's watery, slow season of new parenting. Like it doesn't have to be one or the other.
I
So
love that. Taking the pressure off of intercourse, right?
Yeah.
Allowing for intimacy and connection in ways that aren't penetrative for the body.
Yes. Yeah. Because we have to, like, it is a slow beast to warm back up. So talking about the slow roll.
I laugh when you say, oh, intimacy where there's not, penetrative. And I was thinking of a lot of partners who are like, no, it's either sex or I don't feel connected.
Oh, I hear that all the time. Drives me nuts.
Very unrealistic. And I think a lot of what we're talking about in an umbrella is really educating about expectations and teaching them how to communicate about that and where they're at, especially when we talked about the change of desire. How important is that to communicate to your partner, like, it's different from me right now. This is where I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of couples
Yeah.
don't talk about that, and then they get in conflict and they don't know why. And it's a lot of times they did not communicate it or even identify it to be able to communicate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of couples, like you said, they don't talk about it. You guys as family therapists know a lot of times couples just don't talk about all the things, right? We do on the surface, we think we're talking about it, but we're talking about all the like pleasantries of life and the simple things. We're not talking about the deep stuff that really comes up and rears its ugly head. And I think intimacy is the same thing, right? And it's for a lot of people. Maybe you're a very modest background. Maybe it's so private that you almost can't even talk to your spouse about it. And then you become even more inward and it just is like this, it exacerbates itself to where we just literally can't get out of our way to talk about it. And it's important to talk about it. And so I think that sometimes having somebody and this, I'm not a therapist, it's not my lane to help them completely through this, but I do think having interactions with people that have gone before you and are in a marriage and have navigated these things that openly talk about like, this is hard for all of us, gives kind of power to even those really modest couples that don't really communicate all that well to be like, oh, we can talk about this and you should talk about it.
Talking about things, even for women, like if you do venture back in, pain. Yesterday I met with a client and we were talking about sex and she mentioned pain. And I said, pain is never normal. And
Yeah.
she was like, oh, I thought it was supposed to just be that way after postpartum. She had no clue that her vagina could return to a normal or comfortable or even pleasurable state. And so for her, it was a radical shift of, oh shit, I thought every postpartum woman just experienced pain after birth for perpetuity, by the way. And it's just having conversation around some of that can be crucial.
Yeah. Talking about like if you're breastfeeding, your estrogen levels are low, right? If your estrogen levels are low, then your vaginal dryness is high. Like we need lube, and that's okay. That's not like you don't have to be a porn star, friends, to want lube. Like
And to use toys, extend foreplay, to
Yes.
change positions. Your organs got rearranged a little bit. If there's scar tissue,
Yeah,
working on scar tissue.
What felt good might not feel good anymore, and you've got to kind of work through that. And also knowing that just because you start doesn't mean you have to, if you start out, you're like, yes, this sounds good, feels good, let's go for it. And, quarter or halfway through, you're like, this is painful. I wasn't expecting that, or I just can't get comfortable, or gosh, I can't get out, whatever the reason, we get to tap out and say, I'm done. Like progress, right? We made some progress, but we might not get to the finish line.
And I love that. I talk to couples a lot about be okay with adapting to the moment. A lot of them personalize when it doesn't go how they envisioned. Like we're gonna do this is gonna happen, and when it does it, and the partner makes like maybe like a weird face, and they're like, I can tell my partner's uncomfortable, I did something wrong, and they'll just stop it, and they'll cause an injury, like a rupture. So I love that you're talking about being okay, explore, communicate about this. What's this like, and really do a good job of depersonalizing this process because it's new for both partners.
Yeah.
And whole other. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
There's a whole other aspect of like as you're breastfeeding and you're lactating, and especially if you're in that first 12 weeks postpartum, you have an abundant amount of milk. Like one of the neat things bodies do that if body is properly stimulated in the first few weeks, it makes like, it doesn't know if you had 1 baby or 5 babies, body just wants to feed the babies. And so you might have an abundant amount of milk when you go to do something playful that also is releasing oxytocin. Oxytocin makes our milk flow. You might find that you're a body that when your breast is compressed, milk shoots across the room. And if you're one of those like modest, maybe breasts were really sexy to you before and you were used to them being in like just like the sexy category, they're very aesthetically pleasing, they can be touched, and now you're like, oh my gosh, don't touch them because they do unexpected things and it feels embarrassing. Again, going back to like, how can we be wildly candid with our partner about how we feel, what this makes us feel, and that has to flow both ways. But I think everything we've talked about in episode 1 and now today is like communicate, communicate, communicate. And how? How do we break down those walls and just communicate?
Do you mind sharing more? So last episode, we talked about maternal gatekeeping, and sometimes the feeling from mom of, I have to do everything, I have to be fully responsible for everything, and male partner might feel shut out or even just disengaged by his own volition. Do you mind sharing more about how resentment or this feeling of, I've got to take all the things on, can impact sex and intimacy in partners postpartum?
Yeah, I think like just to kind of stereotype where many women need to feel validated and seen and taken care of and held before we're like, damn, you're sexy. And I have time for that on my radar. And Greg, just like you said, our love languages get kind of exacerbated when in the postpartum. That happens too. And now we are more tired than we've ever been. And there's more tasks to do than there have ever been. And so I think just being really cognizant of that and what falls kind of just naturally into the mental or actual workload to the mom, and how we can kind of even that playing field as partners and share the load. I think, and I don't want to say, I feel like a lot of this conversation is like, dads or partners, you just need to do so much extra and then she will be ready to be intimate with you. It's really not about that. It's about like validating and seeing how much extra there is to be done and participating in how I can carry my load so that both of you are coming to life feeling like you're doing this together and refreshed. So I think like that's where my brain goes when I think about how do we help couples get back into this intimacy. I think a lot of it comes from like, let's even the playing field of the workload that has to be done. And then we can kind of turn on that brain that thinks about all the fun stuff in life.
I heard from somewhere, and you can tell me, Angela, if this is an incorrect stat, but I heard from somewhere that, especially at the beginning, breastfeeding can take upwards of 40 to 45 hours a week. So it's a full-time job. Adding that into what we're already doing, plus the extra laundry, plus all the things, I think partners being aware of that stat alone of, they think feeding the baby is no big deal. It's hours upon hours upon hours. Plus now we have the other things too. And that's a lot to take on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so much. And I think this is seen, maternity and paternity leave has changed a little bit. I'm like shocked at how long dads are home right now. And I'm so envious that I didn't have that. My husband was home for like a week, 2 weeks at the most. And these dads are home for like 6 weeks. And so they're seeing how much time and effort and how hard a baby is. Like maternity leave, no vacation. And so I think that's helpful that they're seeing that. Like you said, it is like a full-time job to feed a baby. And that's when feeding is going well. If you have other things going on and they're not going well, it's like time and a half, right? So there's all the tasks, there's all these things and those invisible things that go on, just being aware of it. I think if you can, being on that same page, spending time with each other during this new season is how parents do that. But if they've got to go back to work, they might not see it. And so I do think that's one of the things that social media has been a little bit helpful with is allowing a place for people to talk about this without feeling like we're just bitching and nagging, and also for a place for partners to see this and go, whoa, like this isn't just my person that feels this way. It's a lot of them.
And this goes back to communicating. And I see with a lot of couples, there's an assumption that my partner should just know that these things are done. And I feel like that sets each other up for failure. It's like communicate what those needs are, communicate what that list is. You might have a different perspective of what that is in your role as like say mom or dad, and there's not even communication about that to help each other out. And I think that is really where it starts too, is there are all these extra things. It's okay to communicate and assert your needs so that partner is on the same page. But a lot of times couples just assume, and then when it doesn't happen, that builds resentment as well, which we talked about.
Yeah.
Negatively impacts intimacy.
I think it's a both and, right? I've also heard moms say, like, I don't be the cruise director. I don't have to tell you all the things.
I don't want to be the mom.
I don't want to be your mom. Sure. And so
Yeah.
how do we balance both? Okay, I've got to tell my partner if I need something. And we both just became parents at the same time. Like, we both just got to get our shit together.
Yeah.
And so it's a both and of anticipating as well as sharing, so that hopefully that partner is not feeling like she has to be the list keeper, the cruise director, the parent of an additional human.
And that's where balance is important, because you want to share that.
Yeah.
But you don't want to have to continue on a daily basis, tell your partner what to do.
Truth.
It's let's share this, talk about it, and then we'll revisit in a couple of weeks or a week.
Write it down. Do what you got to do as the supportive partner to remember to keep the list.
Not to be told every single day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about in the last episode with maternal gatekeeping too. Like, you just both became parents if this is your first, or you just became parents of 2 kids if this is your second, and so on and so on. And anytime our identities and our roles are shifting, really cognizant of not doing that maternal gatekeeping, right? Of not being the one that does everything you used to do and everything that just got put on your plate, even when it feels in the first few weeks, to be the one to, maybe you've always wanted the baby, and so now you have a baby and you're like, oh my gosh, this is my baby, and you're like, I'm not a Lord of the Rings person, but you're like Gollum with your little, like, my precious, right? Like, don't be that person, because I can guarantee you that, like, 9.8 times out of 10, that's not a real statistic, that's made up, you're gonna regret that, right? Like, because then you're gonna end up with that long list that baby isn't a baby anymore, now they're 2, but you've set up this pattern, and now you've got to unwind from it. And you do have a resentment, which isn't necessarily 100% fair if you didn't allow your partner to step in. And so a lot of this, like, sharing of the workload and trying to avoid the resentment that might come with maternal gatekeeping and the doing all the things, comes back to, like, well, how did we get here in the first place? And then talking about, like, things like this, putting out things like this into the world so people can listen, and really get their brain going to, how do we avoid this? Not do that.
And I do want to say, kind of in the line of this communicating and being able to get on the same page as we're talking about, one thing a phenomenon that I think that comes up is the non-birthing partner sometimes doesn't feel they have the right to bring up any need for intimacy. Because even from the get-go, from the announcing being pregnant, it's never about the non-birthing partner at that point. It's all on the mama. And then when the baby's born, it's not either about either of them, it's about the baby. And so this whole time, it's like, well, I don't have a right. I have clients who've gone, 13 months without even having that conversation or intimacy, period. They didn't feel like they have the right. And I wonder what your thoughts are. I come from the perspective of, like, you have the right to talk about it and at least get that out in the world so they're aware of your need. But when you're
absolutely
all the stuff we've talked about, like, that's where our mind's at. It's not on intimacy. So it needs to be put back into this lineup, if you will.
Yeah.
I think that the birthing parent, even up to, like, that 13-month mark, right? Anytime under 2, like, little kids are just so demanding and needy that their brain might not be on that, especially if their love language isn't physical touch, right? And they might feel like relationship is doing fine, and they just don't know. If you don't say something, you hope that your partner just knows you, right? But the truth is, like, we don't know if you don't say. And so back to, like, again, communicate, and you have the absolute right within our relationships. We should be able to say whatever our need is, intimate or otherwise, and have it be heard, right? The hope in a well-functioning relationship that you can throw out whatever the need is and have it be heard and validated, at least talked about.
Sure.
And so it's not just like you're hoping for this, but they have no idea that they're in another world.
And that's an area that resentment builds. My partner's not aware of my need. My partner's not aware of my need. Well, did you communicate it? Well, they should know.
Yeah.
No. I mean, they might be dealing with postpartum depression. You know, talk about all the libido
Yeah.
killers that might be going on with you with like the hormones, postpartum depression.
Postpartum anxiety.
To expect that to be on the same page as you is setting your partner up for failure.
And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Men, you are almost just as likely as the female partner to have postpartum depression and anxiety. You don't talk about it. And it has such an impact, right? Because if I'm the male partner and I have postpartum depression, am I attuning to her needs in order to trigger arousal for her? Am I connected to her? Am I soft with her? Am I connected with myself? Right?
Yeah.
And when we look at arousal looks different for men and women. Men, it's spontaneous. Women, it is perceived. So it has to have a lead up. There has to be a warm up for the female brain. Women's attraction starts in the noggin, not in the crotch. Men, it's kind of the other way around.
Even in the context of stress, men can still be aroused. Yeah.
And women, it's not the same. And we have to think about that for our partner of, am I arousing her mentally first in order to get the physiological part to kick on? But men, I really cannot punctuate this enough. This is a huge passion of mine. You are just as likely to have hormone fluctuations, to have postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, issues with sleep, stress, you name it, after the birth of the baby. It is not just mom.
What's tough about that, I think, in a heterosexual relationship, if a male's experiencing postpartum depression, it's easier for them to check out.
Truth.
Because I think naturally the burden falls on the mom, typically, right? So that's a tough dynamic. And another area where resentment builds is, I'm taking all this time while my partner's dealing with this. Well, I'm dealing with it too.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you see, I know you work mostly with women, Angela, but do you see men come in talking about their postpartum depression or anxiety? Do you see them talking about changes in their own mental health?
I try to get a pretty good feel of the family as a whole. I do both in-office visits and in-home visits. And the home visits I love so much because you get a good view of what's really going on. And you get to see them when they don't they're not guarded, right? You're in their space. And I do get to talk to dads about, how is this going? How are you handling these things? Do you feel like, and I also really try to take those opportunities to point out the confidence builders too, right? The things that families clearly are crushing. 'Cause I don't feel like you're doing anything well when you're so tired. You feel like you're just like trying to keep the wheels on. And so I try to get a good pulse of where families are at, and also letting people know that like people are apologizing about the state of their home, right? And it's like, you have a 4-day-old baby and I'm coming to visit you. And I'm like, listen, no. Your home is beautiful and loved and lived in, and y'all are in a deep, thick season. And so just like really getting an idea of where they're at, but also pointing out all the things that feel good to have validated. Hopefully by modeling that, you set just even a seed that this is how we should love and care for each other. Things look different afterwards, saying like, man, you really put this diaper on. Awesome. And I have a hard time doing that. Like, those little things just help you set the seed for that communication that needs to happen for all these things we've just talked about. Also just feel a little bit better about yourself. And if you are struggling in postpartum and you've got some anxiety and some depression, sometimes just having somebody shine the light on the things that are going well can be helpful. It's like that little, like, there's a little bit of glimmer of light coming in through the dark, right? Like, I can do some of this. I am doing these things. So I try to, in my role as a lactation consultant, that's really where I land for supporting that. Obviously looking out for all the things, not just for women, but for men too, about like, is anything on my spidey senses as a practitioner going off here that they need more support?
And it's okay to need more support. Like, I encourage all non-birthing partners to advocate for yourself. You are important in this process, despite what that perception might be because of how society views the birthing partner and the baby. But if you put yourself in a place to advocate for your well-being and you're in a better place, that only benefits your family. You're allowed to not be okay in this process. You're allowed to experience depression. You're allowed to experience the anxiety, the stress, and feeling isolated.
Yeah. And for this to feel different than you thought it was going to feel. Right. I think women are more prone, and maybe I think this because I'm more likely to fall into a small circle of women that are speaking candidly, but talking about like, I always wanted to be a mom, but then I became a mom and holy shit, like I can see why it would be beautiful to not be a mom. We can't say these things out loud, right? And I don't know if there's space to for men to say those things. Like, I love my kids with every ounce of me, and this is the hardest thing I have ever done. And it takes up so much more space and time than I ever thought it did. And so saying that, like, this looks different than I thought it was going to. This feels different than I thought it was going to. Having that space and that opportunity to talk to each other like that.
These conversations are so important because this probably wouldn't be happening 15, 20 years ago, where we're advocating for the non-birthing partner's experience in this process.
I don't think so.
I don't even think like 5-10 years ago.
I was just going to say, my oldest is 8, and we definitely weren't having conversations like this.
Yeah.
Like so my husband got 4 months of full paid paternity leave through his previous employer. And he got made fun of for it. Not just like, wow, that's incredible, but you're doing what? And criticized, like deeply criticized by our family, by our friends, by society of, why would a man ever take that time? And I could not be more grateful he got it. I'm just gonna be real clear with both our babies. Yeah. But yeah, and she's 7, even 7 years ago, it was frowned upon. Like, it wasn't good. It wasn't good. With Skylar, it got a little better 4 years later, but yeah, no. So even in the recent history, like men have been kind of cast to the side on this.
Yeah. And only research, I think, in the last 5-10 years has even considered the male perspective and what was happening, to even though that they experienced the postpartum.
I definitely think we're seeing a positive trend towards looking at the family as a system, as a whole, instead of just focusing on one person.
And that's why I love we're having these conversations. I think this continued conversations like this help the non-birthing partner or men and normalize the process of like, you too have an experience through this. That's important. And we need to also attend to that.
Yeah.
So Angela, as we're kind of wrapping up, what other tips do you have for couples as they're going into postpartum for intimacy? And I don't just mean sex, but I mean just close connection with our partner. What other tips or guideposts, anything you can give them to help make intimacy that much easier postpartum?
Yeah, I think remembering who your person was before they were mom or before dad, which is hard to do when you step into these all encompassing roles. You just can't step out of being a mom. But in the space of when you are together, even if it's just a moment in the kitchen as you're, doing all the things we got to do, like, remember who that person was. Like, remember that, like, you used to be the couple that might like dance in the kitchen for a moment, or like, slap each other on the tush and say like, just like, ridiculous, corny pickup lines to each other. Try to remember that we can do those things without the expectation of it then leading to maybe what it used to lead to, right? Maybe now we just keep those pieces of our relationship so that when we are healed and we are ready to go back to taking it full through to intimacy, whatever that looks like, that we have kept that piece alive, that we don't have to like go back in full. Like, just because you're tired, and you can still keep little pieces of that couple that you were prior to the birth of this baby.
The play, the fun, bring those back.
Yeah.
This can be a period that gets so saturated in the serious. Bring back the play, bring back the fun, bring back that connective piece that probably led to you guys being together in the first place.
Totally. And I think too, like, one of the most helpful tools a therapist gave my husband and I was talking about, I might offload. I was at this time primarily home with kids, and I would offload to him about like how bad our day was. It was hard. Like, the kid didn't nap. We had to go to the grocery store, whatever happened. And my husband is a people pleaser, and he saw that as like, oh gosh, she needs to not have the kids this evening and have time to herself. And there were pieces of that that were true, but mostly I wanted him to look at me and be like, this shit is hard. these are the worst humans, like jokingly, but like be in this with me, saying like how shitty this was. It was hard and it's okay that it was hard. And so our therapist said, look at each other and say, I want comfort or I want a solution. Like, I just want you to be like, yes, girl, you crushed it today. And that baby was a bad baby today. Like, but look how cute he is right now. And versus if you need a solution, if you truly need to tap out, you need some space, then you need to be like, look, I need a solution. Today was rough and I need a moment. And so having some little tools like that can help you so that you can be both, right? You can be like a smart aleck and talking about how terrible this role is and it's just so challenging, and your husband knows that we just need to feed into that. Like, I used to be so spicy. When I am not deprived, I'm kind of spicy and sassy, and I find myself quite funny. And we have this banter, and we can have that if I say, look, I just need comfort. I need you to be on my team right now. Or I can look for you to rescue me. If I am like waving a white flag, I am not okay. Today was a hard day. Like, having those tools.
And I love that because those are things people don't think of when I say the word intimacy, they automatically go to sex. And so I love sharing these tools that are not just about sex. They are about emotional connection, about feeling seen, feeling heard, understood, just feeling connected to your partner.
Yeah. Keeping those little things, that like keeping your little pieces of who you were before you had these babies, I feel like really helps us feel seen and feel like a team instead of just ships in the night passing off the chores.
Well, thank you so much, Angela, for joining us for this second part in our series, where today we talked about intimacy in postpartum, which is so hard. I cannot emphasize this enough, that postpartum is an incredibly unique and beautiful experience, but it is also one of the hardest periods of time that a couple will go through. As always, if anyone has any questions for Angela, topic suggestions, please feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye.